Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is episode 1 in a new series called Uniting. In our day, we are faced with many divisions between people, some small and some large. Our children are growing up with that, and unless we teach them, they will know better how to create divisions than how to unify. In this episode, Dr. Scoresby describes heartfelt methods that begin the process of uniting. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast.
I have wanted my podcast to focus on the family and on children, on parents and children, and on marriage and virtually anything that can be related to the family. Because one of my objectives is to see if I can make a difference by contributing ideas from a variety of people and from my own experience that would help you, the listener, understand some things that might help in your life. One of the series I wanted to create from the very beginning has to do with unity, because it is a situation that crosses a lot of different circumstances. We need the right kind of family unity in families. We need it in our political lives and in society. And we need it in our businesses and a lot of other places. And nowadays, for a variety of reasons, it's hard to come by. The first episode in this series I'm titling Building Heartfelt Bridges, because I believe that there are many different ways to create unity, and one of them is to focus directly on the spirit of them or heartfelt kinds of experiences. I want to begin by giving a little teeny bit of background so that you can understand better where I'm coming from. The truth is that people live together, and because we live together, there are some things that need to exist in order for us to retain our opportunities to be together. For example, historically, the fact that we live together created a need for moral standards, because living those standards prevents some individuals from hurting others in order to get what they want. Morality is really designed to have everybody live by these standards so that no one is injured, or no one attempts or maliciously wishes to injure someone else. So things like honesty and compassion, forgiveness and integrity became really important, because these are signs that an individual is regulating himself or herself so that they don't injure somebody else. Now, the problem is that when there is no agreed upon standards, then individuals gradually exploit or manipulate, and then people get hurt. This hurt separates us from one another and creates great divisions of a variety of kinds. The political divisions, for example, that exist in our country, America, are so significant that they have become commonplace, and people just refer to them as this is the way things are. And the difficulty for that is that we cannot get a lot of things done. So the different political parties try to acquire power so that they can impose their will, rather than having the notion that if we work together, we could accomplish much more. Now, we do have some methods of unifying. These comes out of our Christian background, and these are things like sacrifice and forgiveness. But quite often, even though we sacrifice and forgive, there are gaps that remain between us and other people. We need to learn how to build bridges, and we need to make sure that we learn it early so that we're not too little too late. So in this series, I'm devoting each episode to the methods and processes of unifying us as human beings. It will be clear that unity does not take place by promising it, as many political leaderships do at election time. It's not enough to force it and make it last. Germany tried that out in the 1930s. They forced unity and it didn't last. Neither do the kinds of things that people do to manipulate others to belong to them. But there is a way, and the way has to do with what affects us emotionally or what affects our hearts. So I'm going to begin this series with this episode called Heartfelt Bridges, because I want to give some marvelous examples of people seeking to reconcile or unify themselves when there does not appear to be a pathway. One of the most remarkable examples of unifying when none exists or a pathway did not appear is the long-term, multi-decade problem of the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland. This divide between them has led to political differences, a lot of violence, bombings, murders, a lot of other things. And it went on for years, of course, and people who lived there just became to accept that. They even knew the groups of people who sponsored the violence and whatever. And some said, yes, I support those. And then there were others, and the other division said, I support those. And nothing happened much until some individual came up with this idea that they would take their youth, typically high school aged youth, and take a few who were Catholics and a few who were Protestants and put them together and then take them to tour some parts of the world. I was reminded of this when this group came to Utah a few years ago, and there were Catholic kids and Protestant kids, and Catholic advisors and Protestant advisors. Now examine that with me just for a minute. The bridges were built in part because people agreed to get together and learn about each other. Secondly, the bridges occurred because we had a common purpose. There was something there that brought us together, and in this case, it was traveling and learning about new places. But it's also the case that what went on during this period of time is that these kids began to know each other well. And as they hoped, they created friendships. Now, as we know, friendships are a function of heartfelt emotions. People liking each other, caring for each other, sacrificing for each other, doing all sorts of things with each other. Now, those ingredients in this episode turn out to have been extremely successful. And after several years of doing this, the intensity of the conflict between Catholics and Protestants has died. And their country is more at peace. There might still be some divisions, but the country is more in peace now than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Here's another story which impresses me. It has to do with a college softball game where the girls are highly competitive with each other. And on this day, two teams that were competing for the league championship were playing. You can imagine the tension, you can imagine the excitement, and you can imagine the worry over mistakes. And please imagine also the tremendous competitiveness that might be involved. Well, on this one occasion, a girl from the visiting team stood up to bat and hit a long fly ball that was a home run. When she rounded first base, however, she stumbled and badly sprained her ankle, and she could not walk. Without people saying a word, the first base girl and the second base came over, picked her up, put their arms around her, and walked her around the bases so she could touch each base to get her home run. Now, I don't know what happened to the team, and I don't recall who won the game. I do, however, know what happened to the spectators. The competition and the jeering that was evident before this happened was gone. The ridicule of the umpires and the yelling and screaming of how unfair things, that all disappeared as well. It was an amazing, heartfelt gesture on the part of these two girls, and the girl who hit the home run who was willing to allow that to happen. It's a remarkable thing, actually. Now, let me give you a father and son episode. Here they are. They're arguing in my office, and it's heated. And the father is telling the son that he needs to come home on time at a curfew time. The son is arguing about that, and their argument moved from one topic to another topic until I could see, as an observer, that their conflict between the two of them was widespread and had been going on for a long time. Finally, when they took a breath, I said to the father, "Would you please just ask him what he wants?" And the father said, "Well, why? Why should I do that?" And I said, "Well, because neither of you are winning the conversation about what's just and appropriate. If he's 20 minutes late, does that mean he gets grounded for 3 days? If he's 30 minutes late, does it mean he's grounded for a week? You know, what does it all mean? Because you have not found any agreement thus far." So he nodded to me and he turned to his son, who was probably 16 or 17, and said, "Okay, what is it you want?" And the boy said, "What?" And the father said, "I would like to know what you want." And there was silence. And the boy, who was angry and frustrated, said, "Well, I would like a guitar." Now, his answer was a real surprise to me, and I'm quite sure to the father. And then he started to cry. It was not a whimpering or a weeping cry, it was a big cry. When he finished, the father turned to me and said, "I don't understand." And I said, "Well, you and your son are having an argument over who has the power to control him, or who has the right to make a rule and make it stick. All I ask you to do is to just change the topic of conversation to, I care about you and would like to know what is important to you." It seems so simple sometimes, but it's amazing to me how often married couples, for example, will argue over whose opinion is correct. Well, this book is better than that book. Or I think we should do this on vacation and the other person is different. I've seen couples argue with each other, accelerating into anger and hurt, and I'm thinking, it's just not worth that. Why is it that you don't say something like, "Sweetheart, what is it you want?" And signal that what you really care about is concern for the other person. One of the funnest examples I know of took place in southern Utah. The faculty at this school had been trained how to introduce a learning program called Achievement Synchrony. And it was a program that brought parents and classroom teachers together, and the parents taught some complementary and sometimes the same things as the teacher taught about classroom management, how to get along inside the classroom. And the reason for that program existing in that school was they wanted to improve the academic performance of the school. Half of the kids were transient, they'd come in and then leave. And they needed a way to be able to influence the children and the families quickly. Well, the usual notes from the PTA and the requests for parents to come to parent-teacher conference were all ignored, apparently, because they never worked. So the kids decided to take matters into their own hands. So here's the teacher's letter. She said that she had been teaching about how to talk things through. And when there's a disagreement or something is happening, instead of hit or fight or whatever, let's just talk about it, see if we can solve it. So one day, recess came and the children went outside to play, and she said in her letter that she went to the office to duplicate some papers to be ready for the next period. When she came back, all of the children were sitting in their desks and the bell had not rung. So she said, "What's going on?" And one of the little kids, a girl or a boy, said her name and then said, "Don't interrupt just for a minute. We had a problem out on the playground and we are here now because we want to talk it over." She said, "I've never seen anything like that in my whole life. Second graders coming and deciding to talk over a difference of opinion and see if we can come up with something that we agree with." It's amazing how simple some of these heartfelt agreements actually are. Here's another one. This is personal to me. Involved me and my daughter. Every time a certain school came to play basketball at my local high school, I took some of my children down to meet the sophomore coach. The reason I did is because I told my children this story. That when I was a freshman in my college class and living in the dormitories, we'd had a Christmas party. I was assigned to the refreshment committee and somebody else was assigned on the decoration committee. And our purpose was to invite some, of course, attractive girls, and we were going to have a floor party. Well, pretty soon, amazing decorations showed up. There was a wreath for every door, every apartment door in the hall, and there was about 20 of those. And then there were wreaths in the mirror in the bathroom and all sorts of things. And so the party came and went. And one day I went to the floor meeting and they're talking about what to do. And because it turned out that the boys on the decoration committee had stolen these wreaths. So the discussion at that floor meeting was about what shall we do? So we're sitting there, a bunch of college freshmen. One guy said, well, why don't you just take him back? And with a tinge of sarcasm, one of the boys who had taken the wreaths said, well, we didn't take addresses, stupid. Well, that truth seemed to be very apparent. And then somebody else said, well, why don't we sell them and then donate the money to some good cause? Well, that's sort of nice, but it still doesn't deal with the problem. And now we've got a division going on inside our floor because nobody wants to get caught. And if they were caught, it may not only receive some form of suspension, but they might even be released from their membership at school. So there's quite a bit of pressure going on. And there was one conversation back, one on the other, and this was all solved when one of the people on the floor said, I want you guys to know that I won't have one single thing to do with anything that is dishonest. I don't know what the reaction was of the other boys, but mine was, oh yeah, right. It's exactly what we should do. And they came up with a solution that rectified the differences between the two groups, and I think turned out to be fair and just. Well, as a few years passed, I was moved into a new neighborhood, and the new neighborhood had a lot of new construction. And one time this man and his wife came, bought a lot, and were building a home, and they changed the method of irrigation. Now, for those of you who don't know, irrigation is a big deal in Utah, where I live, because it's a dry state. And if you want to grow a garden or water your lawn or something like that, you need the irrigation water. So they were up in arms. And when I got there, which was a few minutes late, I heard somebody say, we need to get an attorney. They're going to sue this man and have him fix the irrigation system so it'll work. And somebody else said, do you know one? Somebody else said, well, I know a good one. And by that time I sat down. Well, seeing that I was late, the host asked me by name, what do you think? Finally, I have my chance. I've been waiting for years to do this. So I said, I want you folks to know that I won't have one single thing to do with anything that is unjust or inappropriate or will hurt people. Well, the effect was the same. Now, I had told my children that story, and I wanted them to meet the boy who had done it, and at the time he was working as the sophomore basketball coach in his high school. Later on, I asked him about that, and he wanted to know why I was bringing my children to meet him, and I told him he'd forgotten all about it. Now, here's the point of all this. These heartfelt gestures on the part of each person, are what actually prepares the way for an actual reconciliation to take place. And we need more of that than we can imagine nowadays. We're returning bitterness for bitterness and anger for anger and some form of a smear attempt for somebody else. We have parents who sometimes are frustrated with the school and they attack the board. We have board members who think they can decide better for parents what the curriculum ought to be, which is, of course, false. There are a lot of these kinds of situations, and they often occur in our neighborhoods, they often occur in our homes and families and so on. So what is it that we should do? We need to find a way, to touch the hearts of those people, to the protagonists. And sometimes if you look around, it's staring us right in the face and it is possible to do something about it. One last story. Several years ago, I heard of a humanitarian trip in our area where they were taking young men down to Mexico, and they had projects with this village that was several miles outside of the city of Guanajuato. And when we got there, we arrived and they were putting in a concrete floor so that the people could have a corn grinder, an electric corn grinder, because they still made their cornmeal by the old method of crushing between rocks. And they were going to put in a concrete floor. They'd gotten electricity, and now it would work, and it would save the women untold hours. Some women would spend 2 or 3 hours every morning just getting their tortilla flour and all the other flour for the other food. Well, so they're assigning things that go on, and I had two of my sons with me. So when the leader of the group said to me, "What is it you want to do?" I said, "Just send us to the most difficult task." And I was just sort of kidding with my boys. I thought, well, we just as well tell them we're ready to do anything. And so they did, and they assigned us to help clean out a well. And I thought, that'll be nothing. This well might be 6 feet wide or 4 feet wide, and we'll get in there and clean it out and be done in just a little while. As it turned out, it took us nearly a week, about 4 days. And that's because the well was about 30 to 40 feet wide. And it had an aquifer at the bottom, but it had been all cluttered up and messed up by the wind to put dirt and grain and animal manure in it, and they needed to clean because the villagers were in some form of a conflict having to do with where they got the water. The well water was tainted, so they asked the local city to bring it, and the city had agreed for a while, and finally now they were stopping the runs of the truck to bring water in a big cistern, and that was no longer the case. So the village needed this water. So my two sons and I think one was 16 or 17, one was 14 or 15, and we went out. And their tools were metal buckets, 5-gallon metal buckets with a wire handle with a rope attached. And you just dropped it down the well and pulled it up until we had drained all the water. And then somebody had to go down below to put the mud and the muck that was in that well into these buckets so we could lift them up. I don't know if you've ever lifted 5 gallons of mud, but it's pretty heavy. So as it turns out, as my sons told me later, the oldest one decided to stay up on top and help me so I wouldn't fall in, which was probably a good choice. And the other one, the younger one, agreed to go down and get covered up with all the mud and muck. So for the next 2 or 3 days, we dug. We dug with shovels and pulling all those buckets. We maybe went down 3 or 4 feet. But we went down far enough so that you could see the aquifer bubble up. It was just like a miraculous event in this desert place to see this water bubble. And hopefully it will be clean and will stay clean for a long time. So we were nearly finished, and so we went and cleaned up. And actually a fortuitous rainstorm took place. And we washed our clothes just by going out and standing in it because the rainstorm turned out to be a very hard one. But as we were about to leave, the three of us, the mayor of the town gestured and said, "Come with me." Now, we had been having some fun. The men of this village had come and they sang songs, Spanish songs that they enjoyed. And the only one that we knew was La Cucaracha. And so we sang that for them and they all laughed because we did it poorly. And we just had a good time while we were working. But the men came and we came every day for those 3 days. So the mayor took us to his home. And his home was 2 rooms. One of the rooms was filled with goats and goat manure. And the other was filled with the mayor and his 10 children. They did not have much, even by their standards. So when my sons and I looked around, they decided to leave their sleeping bags and the blankets and the water bottles and anything they could think they wanted to leave for him and for his family. Now you might think, why is that about reconciliation? Well, we don't know what happened between the villagers and the town nearby. We only know what happened to us. What happened to us was that when we got home and told people about this story, it seemed to have a curious impact on some who asked questions, what was it like or why or what happened and so on. So we had to tell them a little bit about the baseball game. They were avid baseball players. They had carved a baseball diamond in an outfield out of cactus, actual cactus. So if anybody hit the ball past the cactus, it was a home run because nobody's going to run out in the middle of that cactus forest and try to catch it. So the boys had a good time, and it was a good, honorable, respectful time. And so they told them about that. We told them about the food these people prepared for us, which was more than they had, but they made do, and they gave us as much as possible. and we're there trying to help them and so on. So when we get home, I notice that my sons and I were happy but very solemn. We didn't speak much when we got on the plane to come home. Later on, though, each one of them had to write a paper at school about something related to society, and they both wrote about this man and his kindness and gesture and told a story about it. But one thing that I noticed is that where these two boys, who were next to each other in birth order in our family, there had been a certain amount of tension that was periodic. Most of the time they got along well, but there were some conflicts that almost all disappeared. And they had shared an experience together. They had something that had touched their heart together. They had played and associated with people together and with each other. And so in their own minds, the ideas of conflict between the two of them was just not only unnecessary, but it might be potentially harmful. Now, the point I want to make through all these stories is that there is a heartfelt way, a gesture, a statement, a set of words, a letter or a note or something that can begin the process of building bridges with somebody. It is entirely possible for us to be in the middle of these without ever understanding how we got there. The big question, however, is for us to understand is how to solve them and get out of them.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.